Benjamin for Beginners.
Danger on the E-file.
Hello everyone, I'm Joel Benjamin and welcome to Benjamin for Beginners, a series of video lessons designed for players starting out, particularly children. In the lesson so far, we've covered basic mates and we've talked a little bit about proper opening play. Now let's have a look at an opening where things go wrong. This is a little bit of a trap, but it's really kind of a trap that the trapped player makes himself. And this is in an opening that I like to call the copycat variation. One thing that I've noticed a lot in children's games is I see a lot of kids that just copy their opponents no matter what they do. And they think that it's kind of cool, or they think that they'll annoy their opponent. And surprisingly, a lot of my kids have come to me and told me that their opponent is copying their moves. And what do they, then I say, what should I do about that? Because there really is nothing against the rules about copying your moves. Now, I certainly wouldn't want, so let's say, if somebody plays a move like F4, which I don't like, I like that pawn glued to the F2 square. I don't like to open up tornado lane where you can get the king. But I would want to see black copying and that kind of thing. I know that that player just doesn't feel like using their own mind in the opening. And I've actually seen that in a tournament game from a player at my school. So that's how I know a player doesn't want to use his own mind. But in this case, black is going to copy some very, very normal moves. E4, E5, knight to F3. And this is actually where we started in the last game, where black played knight to C6, and we developed from there. This time, black is going to play a different move, knight to F6. Now, this is not a bad move, even though it works out very badly here. This is actually a very respectable opening. In fact, it's played many, many times by one of the greatest players in the world, Vladimir Kramnik. It's called the Petrov's defense. When white plays knight takes e5, capturing the pawn, the whole idea, though, is that black needs to play the move d6 to chase away the knight, and only after the knight retreats is it safe for black to take this pawn on e4. If you're thinking that black is going to get in trouble on the e-file with his pinned queen e2, I like that you're aware of it. But here black can play queen e7, and nothing really comes of that. The queens kind of cancel each other out. But in today's game, when white plays knight takes e5, if black is in full copycat mode, he's going to play a move which is not very healthy. Knight takes e4. And so here, black has copied white's first three moves. But if white plays correctly from here, white is going to win some material by force. So if you're ever worried about your opponent's copying you and you find that annoying, this is going to be the solution. Well, just stay tuned. First, I'm going to talk about the moves that white can play that don't really get the job done. And some of my students at school have had this position and played a move that looks like a good move, but isn't the best move, okay? When we talk about the best move, we mean the move that is going to work out no matter what your opponent does, and not just a move that works if your opponent is not on the ball. And here, a very tricky move, I know that a lot of kids like to play, is queen to f3. Now, first thing you got to do if you're black, you have to notice everything that's attacked. And sometimes players notice that the knight is attacked, and sometimes they notice that the pawn at f7 is attacked. If you only notice the knight is attacked and you do something like d5 and then queen takes f7 happens, shame, shame. Because if you were tuning in before and you saw the 4-move checkmate, you know that the queen coming to f7 is something that you always have to be aware of whenever that queen moves. Sometimes it's backed up by the bishop, but sometimes it's backed up by a knight. And that's a way a very quick checkmate can occur. However, if black plays correctly, then queen f3 is not very dangerous. And black actually has 3 moves that will get the job done, will defend the threats without losing any material. Now, it's not a move like queen f6 that defends the mate, but white will take the knight. And that's not really acceptable to give away a knight to defend mate. Unless you have no choice whatsoever, you don't want to be giving away pieces. You want to try to save them. Well, black can actually move the knight. And one possibility is knight to g5, and that defends the f7 pawn, and for that matter, attacks the white queen, which must move again. Another move which is acceptable, but I don't really like so much, knight d6. And I don't like this move because it does what we call in the business double parking. That knight is in front of the pawn on d7, which in turn makes the bishop have a hard time getting out. So we usually don't like to put a piece there if the pawn is still sitting on its original square. So for my money, the best move here is knight f6. Again, defending the pawn by blocking the attacker. The queen does not get through the knight to f7. If white continues the attack, black can very easily defend again by blocking the vision of that piece to the square, to the square it wants to go to. So queen f3 is a dangerous looking move, but really not dangerous if black is paying attention. Remember, paying attention and really taking a good look at all your opponent might be trying to do is very, very important. That's really one of the keys to winning your games. Another move I see a lot is bishop to c4. Again, because a lot of players are almost programmed like a computer to attack f7, and those moves always look good, but again, it's just in a position we saw a moment ago. Black can play d5, chasing away the bishop, and white gets nowhere. Well, since the title of this game is Danger on the e-file, it should not be a surprise that black gets in trouble because of something white does on the e-file. Let's take a look for a moment and see if we can figure out what that move is. All right, the move is queen to e2, and this creates some real problems, not just because it attacks the knight, but because white is also looking at the black king. There are some pieces in front of it now, but there are no pawns. It's an open file, and there's potential danger. You always have to be a little bit careful about that e-file when it gets opened up and your king is not castled yet. That is one of the big reasons why every chess teacher will tell you that castling early is a good thing to do, not just to develop the rook, but because when you get your king out of the center, you can have freedom to do so much more in the center without worrying about a big tactical problem. Okay, so after queen to e2, black has a problem with this knight. Now, if black moves the knight, let's say knight to f6, we see the basic problem here. White is going to give what we call a discovered check. Now, one way to think about that is that if you pick this knight up and just move it out of the way, we see that the queen will give check. If you just do that in mind, pick up the knight, you see that the queen is giving check. So basically, the queen has a the knight has basically a free pass to go anywhere it wants to without being captured because the queen will be giving check. Now, when I say a free pass, there can be limits on this free pass. And the mistake I see a lot of kids make is they play knight takes f7. Again, because they're so used to hitting that f7 square in the opening. But here the discovered check doesn't work because black can get out of this discovered check and take the knight at the same time. And white here has a good move in knight g6 check, which is going to win the rook after black gets out of check. But the best move, no question, is knight to c6 check. What a cool move. There's 1, 2, 3 different pieces that can take the knight, but it's just not legal because the queen is giving check. And when your opponent gives you check, you have to drop everything and do something about it. So black has to block the check. Now, don't think that this is checkmate because the king can't move. Don't forget 3 ways of getting out of check: to capture the checking piece, to move the king, or what you do most often in the opening, block. Here, black can block with bishop e7, but then the queen gets taken. If you block with queen e7, the queen is still hanging to the knight on that square, and white will come out with a knight, with a queen for a knight. Now that doesn't mean that white should start running around with his queen because he's an extra one, as an extra one on the board. What he should do now is bring out his pieces, the knight come out, move the center pawns, get the bishops out, just develop all the pieces and eventually win with the queen. Now black can struggle a bit. He could try to make the best of it, and if you are the one that falls into the trap, which of course should not happen after you've watched this video, then you try to make the best of it. And one thing you can try is d5. And now what white should do here is attack that knight again, attack that knight with the pawn. Because since the pawn is worth less than the knight needs to run away from that attack. But here it can't. If it runs away, the knight check is going to win the queen again. Yeah, the king can move, but knight takes queen happens. It doesn't make any difference. So black would have to do something else. He can try, well, he can try bishop b4 check. This is a very common move I see from kids. And this check is almost always not a good move when your opponent can block with the pawn. Then you have a situation where you've just put off your problems for one move, but you've kind of made them worse because now you have 2 pieces attacked. You can't move them both at the same time. A better thing to do would be to play queen to e7 here. And now if white gets greedy and wants to save the knight or move the knight or protect the knight, then black is able to move the knight away and white doesn't get anything. Remember, you want to take what you can get, take what your opponent gives you. Here, white can take on e4, and after queen takes e5, e takes d5. So what's happened? White has won a pawn for free. I know he can get your queen, but you get his. Queen for queen. It's just a trade. And white has one more pawn. And that's after black was careful and avoided the real big trap where he lost his queen. Well, what else can happen from the position after queen e2? The other thing that black can do is he can play queen to e7. This is actually what most players do here. For some reason, there are some players who actually go into this position on purpose. I mean, some, not just kids, but grown-ups who should know better, because after queen takes e4, d6, they can get the piece back. And note that if white moves the knight is pinned. If the knight moves, the queen gets captured by the black queen. So what does white do? Well, white wants to hold on to material. it's tempting to play something like bishop c4, but after black takes a knight, there's no more attack on f7. So the best thing is to defend that knight with d4. And sometimes black tries to attack the knight a few more times to try to avoid losing a pawn. Isn't really successful in it, although it's a little bit tricky. It's not a very good opening for black. If black takes a knight right now, white can take back with the queen or the pawn. And, well, white wins the pawn. And black has made the best of his opening mistake, but an even better thing to do is to not play this copycat variation at all. So here we've seen the dangers of playing without your mind in the first few moves, just copying your opponent, whatever they do. And also the e-file. There are a lot of tactics that happen all the time in games where you can lose pieces on the e-file because they get pinned to your king, or as we saw in this game, we saw discovered check. And that is also an important theme to know. This discovered check, the free pass for the knight, and that wins the black queen. So certainly a disaster for black in the opening, losing the queen for a knight. Not the way we want to start a game. So now we have a little bit of an idea of the kinds of things that can go wrong in the opening. This is a very common type of opening tactics. Tactics are special moves that can win material or get a checkmate for one side. And this is an example of one that is pretty common and is very, very handy to know. Now, I've shown this trap in classes a few times, and I've been disappointed to see some people go out and play it for black. You know, don't play something just because you know it and you want to show off. You only want to get this position with the good side. You don't want to get the bad position. So you only want to play it for white. But now you know about it. Danger on the e-file. In the next lesson, we'll switch gears and have a look at the endgame. So now that we've got a little bit of an idea of what we want to do and what we want not to happen in the opening. Well, thanks for joining me for this lesson. I'm Joel Benjamin, and I hope that you will come back and check out more installments of Benjamin for Beginners.